The notification came through at 6:48 on a Tuesday evening in early March. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of the hospital where I work, still in my scrubs, too tired to drive but too wired to go back inside. I had just finished a 12-hour shift covering for two people who called out, and I was eating cold pad thai from a container balanced on my steering wheel when my phone lit up on the passenger seat. My sister's name on the screen. I expected something ordinary. A question about Mom's birthday. A link to a sale she thought I'd like. Instead, don't bother coming to the engagement party. We talked about it and everyone agrees it would be better without you there. Please respect that. I read it 3 times. I set the container on the seat. I placed my phone face down. Outside the garage, the city was still running. Horns, a distant siren, the mechanical grinding of a bus pulling away from the curb. Inside my car, it was very quiet. 27 years of being someone's little sister, and it ended like a group text nobody wanted to be, CC'd on. My response took 4 minutes. I typed and deleted twice. What came out finally was, okay, 1 word. No question marks, no please, no demand for a reason. I had learned a long time ago that asking for reasons in this family only gave them material to work with. They would explain, and the explanation would somehow circle back to a version of me that I didn't recognize but couldn't argue against, without sounding defensive. So I sent the 1 word and I drove home. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than the message did. My sister Cecilia has always been the sun this family orbited. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, though for a long time I did. I say it the way you described weather, accurately, without expecting it to change. She is 4 years older, louder in every room, the one who inherited my father's charm and my mother's talent for making everyone feel like they were her favorite. She dazzles people on contact. I watched it happen my whole childhood. At every dinner table and school function and extended family gathering, and I understood very early that whatever warmth existed in our house, it moved toward her the way plants angle toward light. That is not unusual. Families have favorites. What was unusual, I understand now, was how deliberately I was kept just close enough to be useful. I was the one who drove my mother to her appointments when my sister was busy. I was the one who edited my father's emails to his business partners because he distrusted autocorrect. I covered the rent for 2 months when my parents had a cash flow problem right after I graduated from nursing school, before I had even paid off my own move-in deposit. I did these things freely because that is what you do for family, and I believed, genuinely, for longer than I should have, that the doing of them was its own kind of belonging. The engagement party my sister was planning was for her and her fiancé, a commercial real estate developer named Preston, who wore the same 3 expressions in rotation and spoke mostly in sports metaphors. The party was at a venue in River North, the kind of place that charges $400 a plate and calls it intimate. My parents had announced the event at Christmas with the energy of people unveiling something they'd been building in secret for months. My sister glowed. Preston shook my father's hand for what felt like a full minute. I stood at the edge of that living room, holding a glass of sparkling water and smiled until my face hurt. I wasn't invited to help plan any of it. I found out the date through my cousin, who mentioned it in passing and assumed I already knew. I did not already know. I registered the information and filed it under things to ask about later, which is where I kept most of my feelings about this family. And then, 6 weeks before the party, the text arrived. I went to work the next morning and the morning after that. I am good at compartmentalizing. You learn fast in a hospital that your feelings are not the emergency in the room, so you put them somewhere with a lid and you tend to the actual emergency. I applied the same skill to the text from my sister, and I functioned fine. What I couldn't let go of was the timing. We talked about it and everyone agrees. Everyone. My parents then had agreed. My sister didn't make unilateral decisions about family matters. She was too savvy for that. She would have run it past them first, gotten their sign-off, and come to me only once she had consensus, which meant my mother and father had sat in a room and decided that my presence at their daughter's engagement party was a problem they needed to manage. I thought about this on my lunch breaks. I thought about it during the long stretches between patient rounds. Something didn't add up, and the more I tried to trace the shape of it, the more certain I became that the rejection wasn't about feelings. It was about logistics. Something was happening that they didn't want me near. I just didn't know what yet. The answer arrived in a form I never expected. A certified letter from a law firm I had never heard of, addressed to me at my apartment, regarding a matter I had no memory of involving myself in. The firm was called Haverford and Sims. The letter was 3 pages. The subject was a small business loan that had gone into default. The borrower was listed as Rees Wellness Group, LLC. The co-signer listed was me. I had never heard of Rees Wellness Group. I had never signed anything for a loan. I'd never been asked. My hand was steady when I put the letter down on my kitchen counter. My breathing was steady. But somewhere under the steadiness, something that had been cracked for a very long time started to split open completely. Before I explain what I found, let me tell you something about who I was before I found it. I grew up in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, the younger of 2 daughters in a household that ran on performance. Not cruelty. I want to be precise about that, because cruelty is obvious, and what happened to me was never obvious. My parents were functional, church-going, respectable. We had dinner together most nights. We went on 1 vacation a year, usually somewhere within driving distance. By every external measure, we were a normal family. The difference was invisible, unless you lived inside it. And the difference was this. My sister's failures were opportunities for support, and mine were evidence of character. When Cecilia dropped out of her first college semester, my parents didn't lecture her. They flew out to visit, took her to dinner, and helped her research transfer options. When I got a C in AP Chemistry junior year of high school, my father sat me down for 45 minutes and talked about the cost of mediocrity. Same household, different mathematics. I won a regional science competition at 15. My parents posted about Cecilia's community theater performance that weekend. The competition trophy sat on the shelf in my room for 2 years before my mother asked me to move it to the garage because it was cluttered. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you this so you understand the architecture I was living in. A house where you can be made to feel like a bother simply by succeeding at the wrong time. I learned to work quietly. I got scholarships because I could not count on help. I chose nursing because it was a path I could walk entirely on my own without asking anyone to believe in me first. I graduated with honors. I got a job at a level I trauma center. I built a life in a city 4 hours from home, not to escape, but because the opportunity was there and I had trained myself to follow opportunities without waiting for permission. That distance helped. I saw my family 4 or 5 times a year. Holidays, the occasional birthday, the 2 or 3 visits that felt obligatory but were easier when they had natural endpoints. My relationship with Cecilia had settled into something that felt almost functional. We weren't close, but we weren't antagonistic. We texted sometimes. I came to her graduation party, her housewarming, the celebration when she got promoted to regional director at her company. I was at every milestone. Mine went unattended. My parents didn't come to my nursing school pinning ceremony. My mother said she had a prior commitment she couldn't move. My father said he'd come next time, as though there would be a next time for that specific thing. I stood in the auditorium in my white uniform with my colleagues and their families, and I looked at the empty chairs that were not really empty because I had not saved them. Because I had known, somewhere I didn't want to look, that no one would be coming. I took myself to dinner afterward. Salmon and a glass of wine at the bar of a restaurant I couldn't quite afford. I told myself it didn't matter. I almost believed it. The morning after the Haverford and Sims letter arrived, I called the number at the top of the page. The woman who answered was professional and careful. She confirmed the loan existed. She confirmed my name was on the cosigner documentation. She confirmed the loan had been taken out approximately 18 months earlier and had been in default for 6 months. The outstanding balance was $240,000. I told her I had no knowledge of this loan and had not authorized my name on any documentation. She said she understood that was my position and suggested I obtain legal counsel. I did that afternoon. Her name was Teresa, a contracts attorney who worked out of a small firm near my hospital. She had the particular energy of someone who had spent years being underestimated and had decided to find it useful rather than frustrating. I liked her immediately. I showed her the letter. She read it twice. She asked me several questions. Then she asked me something that made the back of my neck go cold. Has anyone in your family recently asked you to sign documents? Anything at all? Even something routine seeming? I thought about it. 18 months ago. I had been home for Thanksgiving. My father had asked me to sign something. He described it as a notarization form for a family account, some administrative thing related to my grandmother's estate being sorted out. I had signed it at the kitchen table while the football game played in the background. I had not read it carefully. Why would I? It was Thanksgiving. He was my father. Teresa's expression when I told her this was controlled, but I could see her filing it. Over the following 2 weeks, she pulled everything she could about Reeves' Wellness Group. What she found was methodical and ugly. The company was a wellness center concept, spa services, nutritional coaching, corporate wellness packages that my sister had incorporated 20 months earlier. She had used it to secure a business loan to fund build-out on a space in a suburb of the city she lived in. The loan required a co-signer with a credit profile stronger than hers. My name appeared on the application. My credit score, my hospital employment, my income verification. All of it was accurate. All of it had been assembled without my knowledge. And the signature on the co-signer agreement was mine, lifted from whatever my father had put in front of me at that kitchen table. The business had opened. It had struggled. It had closed 11 months later. The default notices had been going to an address I had never lived at, my parents' house. They had known for 6 months that I was on the hook for $250,000, and nobody had said a word. I drove home from Teresa's office on a Thursday, and I sat in my apartment for 3 hours without turning on any lights. My upstairs neighbor was playing music I could feel more than hear. My coffee was cold before I touched it. I had been asking the wrong question for weeks. I kept trying to understand why my sister had sent that text, why the party, why the exclusion. And I kept hitting walls because I was looking for an emotional answer to what was actually a practical calculation. They didn't want me at that party because they were afraid of what might come up, afraid I'd mention the loan, afraid that proximity would create the conditions for me to learn something. The exile was preemptive. It was containment. My mother had written something in a birthday card to me when I was in college. I found it again last year in a box of old things. She wrote, "You've always been so independent. We never worry about you." At the time, I read it as a compliment. Now I understood it differently. It was an explanation. Their indifference was not neglect. It was permission. They had decided I would be fine, and having decided that, they felt free to direct their attention, and apparently their resources, and eventually their crimes, elsewhere. I did not call my family. I did not respond to the 2 texts my mother sent that week asking if I was coming home for Easter. I went to work. I talked to Teresa. I began building what I came to think of as the paper record. Every document, every timeline, every provable fact that Teresa could verify and I could hold in my hands. What came back was worse than I had imagined, and I had imagined a lot. There was a woman named Beverly who had worked as my father's office manager for nearly a decade. I had met her once at a company holiday party, thought nothing of it. Teresa found her name on a secondary document related to the loan application. She had served as a notary on one of the signature pages. Beverly, it turned out, had left my father's company 8 months ago under circumstances she described to Teresa as not voluntary. When Teresa reached her through a mutual professional contact and explained what she was looking into, Beverly agreed to meet. I was not at that meeting. Teresa briefed me the next day. Beverly had notarized the documents under the impression that I had provided verbal consent and simply couldn't be present in person. My father had told her this was common practice for family estate matters. She had not questioned it because she trusted him and because she had been doing him professional favors for years, the way employees sometimes do for bosses they respect. When the business started failing, Beverly had raised concerns to my father about the documentation. He had dismissed them. When she pushed harder, she was let go. She had kept copies of everything. She had kept them, she told Teresa, because she had a feeling she would need them someday. She did not seem surprised that the day had come. What those copies showed was a paper trail that ran from my father's office to my sister's loan application to my name on the co-signer line. The signature transfer had been done with enough care that it wasn't immediately obvious, but it also wasn't remotely defensible under scrutiny. And Teresa had a handwriting analyst confirm within 48 hours that the signature on the co-signer agreement did not match my genuine signature on any other document. $240,000. Built on a piece of paper I had touched for 30 seconds at a holiday dinner while the Lions played the Bears. Teresa contacted the lender's legal department directly. She laid out our evidence. The handwriting analysis, Beverly's account, the timeline that showed I'd never been informed, consulted, or in any legitimate way connected to this loan. She requested that my name be formally removed from all default proceedings and that the lender acknowledge the fraudulent nature of the cosigner documentation. The lender moved quickly, the way financial institutions move when fraud is the more expensive problem. Within a week, I received written confirmation that I was not being held responsible for the outstanding balance. My credit report would reflect no negative action. For all practical purposes, as far as the money was concerned, I was protected. The dominoes were a different matter. My father called on a Wednesday morning. I was between patients. I looked at my phone and let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go. He left a message that was controlled in the way things are controlled when someone is fighting to keep their voice from doing something involuntary. Ivy, this is your father. There are some things we need to discuss. Please call me back. My name is Ivy. I had not heard him say it with that particular heaviness in a long time. My sister called 20 minutes later. No voicemail. Just 3 missed calls in a row, which told me everything about her state of mind. My mother sent a text. We're very worried. This is a family matter, and we should handle it as a family. Call your father. I saved all of it. I had learned from Beverly to keep copies of things. I took a week of PTO I'd been sitting on since the previous summer. I drove to a lake house I'd rented, not owned, rented, through a company that curated properties for short-term stays, about 2 hours north of the city. It was a cedar and glass place on a quiet lake in a part of the state that turned gold in October, even though it was still early spring. The owner had left firewood stacked on the porch and a note about the kayak. I am telling you about the rental because the commentary I later received from my sister after everything came out included the line, "You've always had to make everything about your lifestyle." I want to be clear that I rented a modest property for 1 week to give myself space to think. I did not own a lake house. I did not have a lake house to withhold from anyone. That was the other story. This is my story. And in my story, the protagonist makes $41 an hour and shops at Aldi and has approximately $6,000 in savings after paying off student loans. What I had that mattered, was a clean credit report, a job I was good at, and a paper record that proved exactly what had happened. I called Teresa from the porch of the rental house with the lake making small sounds in the background. I told her I wanted to file a police report for identity fraud and financial document forgery. She said she had been waiting for me to be ready for that. I'm ready, I said. She filed it the next day. The report triggered an investigation that moved faster than I expected. Fraud cases involving forged notarizations and loan applications are not uncommon, and the combination of Beverly's documentation, the handwriting analysis, and the lender's own internal review created a file that required very little additional construction on the part of the investigators. My sister was the primary subject. My father was named as a co-facilitator. The notary issue created a separate thread for Beverly, who was ultimately treated as a cooperating witness rather than a suspect, given her cooperation and the evidence that she had been misled. I was not notified of every development in real time, but Teresa kept me informed of the significant ones. The day the investigators formally contacted my sister, my phone received 42 calls. I counted them later. My mother, my father, my sister. 2 numbers I didn't recognize. I answered none of them. My father sent a letter, a physical letter, handwritten, which surprised me enough that I read it. He wrote about the year I was born, about carrying me in from the hospital and putting me in a crib he had assembled himself. He wrote about a fishing trip we took when I was 8 that I barely remember. He wrote about how proud he was of what I had built. And then, in the last paragraph, he wrote, "We thought you would be all right. We always thought you'd be all right without us. That was wrong of us. It was selfish and wrong, and I'm sorry for what we did and what we failed to do. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm asking for nothing. I just needed you to know." I read the letter twice. I put it in a folder. I did not write back. What my father had articulated, without quite saying it, was the truth that had been operating in this family my entire life. They had decided, early and without consulting me, that I was the one who would be fine. And having made that decision, they had directed every available resource, every act of protection, every assumption of fragility toward my sister. And when my sister needed something they couldn't give her, they reached into the person they had always counted on to absorb without complaining, and they took it. They thought I'd be all right because I'd always been all right. What they missed was that I had always been all right, because I had no other option. Being all right was not evidence that I didn't need anything. It was evidence that I had learned not to ask. My sister's case moved through the system over the following months. She was charged with loan application fraud and identity misuse. She hired a private attorney, Preston, the fiancé, and did the engagement by April. I heard this secondhand through a cousin, not because anyone in my immediate family told me. My father received a lesser charge as a facilitating party. His cooperation with investigators in exchange for a reduced exposure meant that most of what settled against him was financial rather than criminal. Beverly was not charged. The engagement party at the River North venue never happened. The family gala. The annual Christmas gathering my parents had hosted every December for as long as I could remember. The one with the catered food and the extended family invited and the photographs that would end up on my mother's Facebook did not happen that year either. My mother posted nothing. The absence was its own kind of announcement. I did not reach out to gloat. I did not reach out at all. I went back to work. I took the extra shifts. I spent Thanksgiving with two colleagues who also had no family plans, and we made a turkey that was slightly wrong in several ways, and we ate it at 10 at night in someone's apartment wearing pajamas, and it was the most relaxed holiday I had had in recent memory. In February, I got a message from my cousin Noelle, one of the few members of the extended family I genuinely liked, a school counselor in her mid-30s with a specific steady kindness that I had always trusted. She asked if we could talk. We met for coffee the following weekend in a bakery that was always too warm and always worth it. Noelle had been at most of the major family events over the years. She had seen enough to form her own conclusions, and she had never been the type to keep them entirely to herself, which I valued. She told me she had been worried for years. She told me she had watched the way the family treated me since we were children, and that she had never said anything because it was not her family to correct, and she had not wanted to create conflict. She said she was sorry for that. Then she pushed a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a screenshot she had taken years ago. She wasn't even sure why, she said, except that it had made her uncomfortable and she had wanted a record of it, of a text thread between my mother and her own mother, Noelle's mother, from around the time I had graduated from nursing school. In the thread, my mother wrote, "Ivy is so capable, she doesn't need the same things Cecilia does. I worry about Cecilia. Ivy is going to be just fine wherever she lands." That was it. That was the whole document. Ivy is going to be just fine. I read it and I understood, fully and completely, the entire machinery of my childhood. The assumption of my capability had been the mechanism of my deprivation. My competence had been the justification for their neglect. I had been so reliably, stubbornly fine that they had built their entire relationship with me around the premise of my fineness. And then they had taken that premise and eventually, casually, at a holiday dinner table while I watched football, used it to steal from me. I did not cry in the bakery. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. I thanked Noelle. I meant it completely. My mother called me in April. I let it ring twice and then, for reasons I still don't entirely understand, I answered. She sounded smaller than I had ever heard her, not perform smallness, which I had learned to recognize. Actual reduction. Like something had been removed from her that she had not expected to need. She did not apologize right away. She talked for several minutes about logistics, the legal situation, my father's status, the sale of some assets to cover fines. She talked about Cecilia, who was not doing well, who was living at home, who was angry in a direction that had apparently turned back toward my parents in ways that surprised them. She said, "I think she feels like we didn't protect her properly." I let the silence hold for a moment. "She feels like you didn't protect her," I said. My mother caught it. I heard her catch it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I know what we did. I'm not calling to explain it away. I needed to hear your voice. And I needed to say that I know." I did not tell her it was okay. It was not okay. It is not a thing that becomes okay because someone says they know about it. But I stayed on the phone for another few minutes. We talked about nothing. The weather, a show she was watching. It was the most ordinary conversation I had ever had with her, stripped of every performance, every careful management of family narrative. Just two people talking in the space left by everything that had collapsed. When I hung up, I sat with it for a while. There are things that don't get repaired. Some of them are too broken and some of them were never built right in the first place. My relationship with my mother is in the second category. I can see it clearly now, with the kind of clarity that only comes once you stop needing someone to be other than what they are. She is a woman who made choices she has now had to account for, and she will spend a long time with the weight of those choices, and I do not need to carry any of that weight for her. But I stayed on the phone. Maybe that means something. I'm not sure yet what. The spring that came that year felt different from others. I ran more. I worked on a project I had been putting off, a community health initiative I had been asked to help design for underserved neighborhoods in our coverage area, the kind of work that pulls you forward instead of pressing down on you. I also started meeting weekly with a small group of new nurses, recent graduates navigating their first year in a hospital setting, because someone had suggested I might be good at it, and I had said yes without overthinking. What surprised me was how much I got from those sessions, not in a performing generosity way, in a way where you explain something you've always known and hear it land differently in the room, and something in you recalibrates a little. Noelle came to visit in June. We spent a Saturday at a farmer's market and then sat on my apartment balcony until 11 at night, talking about the kind of things you can only talk about when the primary crisis has passed. She asked me what I wanted the next chapter to look like. I told her I wanted it to look like work I cared about, like waking up without the background noise of waiting to be evaluated, like having people in my life who were there because they chose to be, not because we shared a last name and proximity had done the work for them. She nodded. She said, "That sounds like enough." It did. I don't know what it means to forgive people who are never going to see me clearly. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word for what happens when you finally stop waiting for something that was never coming. What I know is that the energy I used to spend hoping that the next visit would be different, that this time they would see the thing they had been not seeing for 3 decades, that energy is available to me now. I can put it somewhere it actually goes. My sister's case was resolved in September. She received a conditional sentence with substantial fines and mandatory community service. No prison time. I didn't have strong feelings about the outcome either way. What I had needed was for the record to be accurate. And the record was now accurate. My father sent one more letter in the fall. It was shorter than the first. It contained 3 sentences. The last one said, "I hope the distance you needed is also giving you something good." I put it in the folder with the other one. That is where it belongs. Some stories end with the person who was wronged standing somewhere expensive, looking out at something beautiful, feeling triumphant. I want to be honest with you. I stood in a hospital corridor at 6 in the morning last November, under fluorescent lights, with coffee that had been sitting too long, and I felt fine. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just fine in the way that means something real now instead of something I had no choice about. The difference, when I look back on it, is this. That fine used to be a ceiling. Something I hit and stayed under, in a family that needed me to stay there. Now it's a floor, and what I build on top of it is entirely mine. I've thought a lot about the word fine since all of this happened. My whole life, being fine was something I did automatically, the way you breathe without deciding to. I was fine when my parents didn't come to my pinning ceremony. I was fine when my sister got the calls and the visits and the patients and I got the silence. I was fine when I worked double shifts to pay my own way through a program nobody in my family attended. I wore fine like a second skin, and I wore it so well that the people closest to me stopped asking whether it was real. That's the part that took me longest to understand. My family didn't take from me because they were cruel, exactly. They took from me because they had decided, somewhere early and without saying it out loud, that I didn't need what they were giving away. My capability became their permission. Every time I handled something on my own, I was teaching them that I could handle more. And eventually, what they took wasn't just attention or time or the ordinary presence of people who love you. They took my signature, my credit. My name on a document I never touched, for a business I never knew existed, for $250,000 that was about to become my problem. The consequences of that choice didn't land on me. I made sure they didn't. But they landed, and they landed hard. And I think about that when people ask me whether I feel guilty about filing the report. I don't. The consequences that found my family were not something I created. They were something my family built, slowly, over years of small decisions that each seemed containable until they weren't. That's what I mean when I say I believe in cause and effect more than I believe in almost anything else. Not in a fatalistic way, not in a way that removes anyone from responsibility, In the opposite way, in a way that puts responsibility exactly where it belongs. My father made a choice at a kitchen table on Thanksgiving while I watched football and trusted him. My sister made a choice when she put my name on a document instead of asking me. My mother made a choice every time she decided I was the one who didn't need her. Those choices had a direction, and they traveled in that direction until they hit something solid. What I've been working on since the mentoring, the community health work, the honest conversations with Noelle over 2 warm coffee is not about recovering from what happened. It's about deciding, deliberately, what kind of choices I want to be making. The ones that go somewhere I'd actually want to end up. The ones I could write down and not flinch at. Teresa told me once, near the end of the legal process, that most people in situations like mine spend the first few months angry and the next few months sad and eventually arrive somewhere that feels like neither. I asked her what she'd call that somewhere that feels like neither. I asked her what she'd call that somewhere. She thought about it. She said, accurate. That word has stayed with me. Accurate. Not healed, not fixed, not triumphant. Just seeing things the right size. Seeing myself the right size, which is something I don't think I had ever fully done before. Not when I was shrinking to stay under a ceiling. Not when I was performing fine for an audience that needed me manageable. I'm a nurse. I spend my days around people in the worst moments of their lives. And the thing I've learned from that, the real thing under all the clinical knowledge, is that most people are more resilient than they believe and more capable of honesty than they allow themselves, including me, including the people who hurt me, including, maybe, the family I came from. I don't know yet. That part isn't finished. But this part, the part where I know what happened and why and what I did about it, this part is done, and it's accurate. And that, for right now, is enough.